Well, one of the things that I learned over the years is, you know, when you first start to learn something, and I'll go back to a quote that I heard that was from Bruce Lee, and I think he borrowed it from a Zen philosophy, which was, before I learned how to punch, a punch was just a punch, and a kick was just a kick. Then I learned how to punch, and I learned how to kick, and I found out that there were reverse punches, there were back fists, there were open hand strikes, there were round kicks, there were side kicks.
It starts from your toes and then it whips up your body, and then your arm is an extension of that whipping effect. It starts from the shoulder, comes from the arm, and then accelerates at the very end. So all the power is coming from the legs, just like every other punch.
So a punch was no longer just a punch, or a kick was no longer just a kick. But once I understood the martial art, I realized that a punch was just a punch and a kick was just a kick.
It's a long way from this, the symbol of civilized sport, the peacetime art of self-defense, to this, but the bludgeon is in use today as it was thousands of years ago. You won't find it in the squared circle, but you will on the battlefield. It's handy in a close fight when only one of you is coming out alive.
I turn the magazine up and I come through with the elbow.
If I ever see this on a stop, I'm immediately making space. What are you doing? Fix your feet. I'm immediately addressing that. No one punches from here.
And I heard that many, many years ago, because I came out to California to train with Dan Inosanto and Richard Bustillo, because I was a fan of Bruce Lee, and they were the guys that were teaching the Jeet Kune Do and all that. But I realized it took me 25, 30 years of training to understand that Bruce was right on, spot on about all of the things that he was saying, especially in regard to that. Because everything seems complicated at first. You understand it, you practice it, and then you get to the point where you start to be able to strip away, to get down to the core, the things that work. And honestly, in regard again to Bruce, I think that was one of the reasons that Bruce decided that he couldn't teach large numbers of people, because every single individual was just that. They were an individual. So what he would teach this person who was 6'6" as opposed to what he would teach this person who was 5'6" were completely different martial arts. And that's the same thing that I've found to be true in my journey, is that I know what works for me, and that's not necessarily what's going to work for someone else, but inside of what I know works for me, there's a nucleus of things that every fighter, every martial artist has to have as a fundamental or building block foundation, so that they can be the fighter the best fighter that they can be in the end. But that foundation has to be built. But in order to find that foundation and realize what it is, you have to get to the point where a punch is just a punch and a kick is just a kick.
I once heard somebody say that fighting is simple, but it isn't easy. Does that make sense to you? Does that resonate?
Well, it is, and it is. It's very simple, because anybody can be a fighter, but there's a big difference when you've got someone standing across from you who is also a fighter, and to know that, you know, someone in a match, let's say, or, you know, in a real fight, if that's the case, that person's going to do everything they can. They're going to bring the culmination of all their efforts, all their teaching, and all their understanding, all their conditioning, and everything that they've learned. They're going to bring that game to you. So you better be able to stand tall and be able to meet that with everything that you've done over the years, and your best product that you can present too. So that's where it becomes real, real hard, because again, you have to bring your fight game at the best and highest level every single time, because if you don't, you're going to pay the price, and that price is pain and broken bones.
If there was an Emerson martial art that was only taught to people who are just like you, what would be some of the core principles? What would be the teachings of that art based on your experience?
Well, that's a great question, because I've spent probably the last 20 years addressing that exact topic. And really what it comes down to, and again, I might offend some people, but the only reason that I believe that I can say the things that I'm going to say is because I've tasted all of those other disciplines. I've spent years doing all those other disciplines, so it's not something that I'm just taking lightly. And I wouldn't make a statement unless I truly believe it, and I wouldn't truly believe it unless I had spent a lot of time figuring it out, pondering on it, applying it, seeing what works, which doesn't. And what that is what it comes down to really is a foundation of boxing and wrestling. Now, when I say wrestling, I mean jiu-jitsu, judo, aikido, all of those ground fighting arts. I just say wrestling because I'm an American. I grew up as a wrestler and when I was in high school and all that. But it's boxing and wrestling, and those are the fundamental arts. If you gave me someone and said, Ernie, you have this person for 2 months, they're going to have to deploy somewhere or go somewhere, and they're going to be in a hand-to-hand combat situation. I'm making this up. God forbid that our soldiers have to go and actually fight it out, but sometimes they do get into a situation like that. But what I would teach that individual is good fundamental boxing skills and some good ground fighting skills, aka wrestling, jiu-jitsu, or whatever you'd like to call it. So the core fundamental things that I do as an individual are boxing and the ground fighting. I don't have a lot of time for a lot of the other fancy stuff. I don't fight like a crane. I don't fight like a praying mantis. I fight like a man. And that's really what it comes down to.
Depending on which circle you happen to find yourself in, there either seems to be a divide or an integration between martial arts and MMA.
Well, there is, and I'll tell you that's just because what happened, and if again we go back all the way to Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee was, in my mind, one of the original MMA artists. So I mean, he was one of those guys that his foresight was so far-reaching that he knew that, you know, most people coming from whatever discipline it was, whether it was a striking art or a kicking art or a throwing art or a wrestling art like judo and jiu-jitsu and those, he knew that as a person in any confrontation, you're gonna flow through all of those different ranges and proximities to your opponent. And so he started to put those things together. And so when you get into the question that you ask about the differentiation between MMA and martial arts, I think what it is it's basically comes down to this. Rorion Gracie one time told me something right when the UFC started, and it's turned out to be very true. He said, Ernie, the Brazilians are going to dominate this sport until the Americans figure it out. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he goes, well, because the Brazilians, and what we're doing is we are involved in the jiu-jitsu aspect of it, but the Americans are going to come in, they're going to be wrestlers, boxers, judo, taekwondo, they're going to throw all this stuff into a blender, and in the end, that's probably where this sport is going to end up. And now I'm not dissing on the Brazilians, because I bet 99% of them could tear me limb from limb, but that was what Rorion had said, and I believe that's what he meant, that there's going to be an evolution of this sport. We as Brazilians are going to dominate it until the rest of the world figures out how to bring something a little bit more well-rounded or bigger or better to the game. And sure enough, if you look at the evolution of the UFC, of MMA and all that, now it's really a blender. They'll throw everything in there, because what it comes down to in the end is if it works, who cares where it started, who cares where it came from. We only care about one thing: does it work?
And where down we go.